If you're trying to chase someone back, you've already lost the power you don't even realize you had. Attraction doesn't respond to desperation, explanations, or long messages sent at 2 a.m. It responds to absent self-respect and emotional regulation. When you stop performing for attention and start standing in your own value, something interesting happens. The dynamic flips, the silence becomes louder than words, and suddenly the person who walked away begins to feel the weight of losing you. Now listen carefully. The biggest mistake people make after separation is staying emotionally available while pretending they are moving on. They stop calling, but they keep waiting. They stop texting, but they replay conversations in their head. That is not detachment, that is silent begging. Emotional availability is not about what you say, it's about what you energetically offer. When you are still ready the moment she reaches out, when your mood depends on her validation, when your day collapses because she didn't respond, you are still chasing even if your phone is quiet. Pulling back emotionally doesn't mean becoming cold or rude. It means you stop over-explaining yourself, you stop justifying your worth. You stop proving that you are a good person who deserved to be chosen. You accept that if someone needed convincing, they were never aligned with you in the first place. This shift is uncomfortable because it forces you to sit with uncertainty, and most people would rather chase certainty than tolerate silence. But silence is where respect is rebuilt. When you withdraw emotional availability, you disrupt the pattern she became comfortable with. If she was used to you being understanding, forgiving, always there, always waiting, that predictability made you emotionally cheap. Not because you lacked value, but because your value was always accessible. Humans don't miss what they can reach anytime. They miss what they assumed would always be there and suddenly isn't. This is where people get it wrong. They think ignoring her will make her miss them. Ignoring is an action. Detachment is a state. You don't pull away to manipulate. You pull away because you realize that staying emotionally invested in someone who chose distance is self-betrayal. And self-betrayal kills attraction faster than any mistake ever could. When you stop being emotionally available, you also stop reacting. You don't jump when she breadcrumbs you with a casual message. You don't pour your heart out because she showed mild curiosity. You respond calmly, briefly, and without emotional urgency. Not to play games, but because your nervous system is no longer centered around her approval. That calm is unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity creates reflection. Attraction doesn't reignite because you convince someone logically. It reignites when they feel a shift they can't control. She starts questioning why you're different, why you're not asking, why you're not pushing, why you're not chasing closure. And that question forces her to confront something uncomfortable. Your absence didn't destroy you, it stabilized you. The irony is that the moment you truly stop needing her to return is often the moment she becomes curious about coming back. Not because you waited correctly, but because you reclaimed your emotional authority. You stopped giving someone front row access to your inner world without commitment. You stopped leaking energy where it wasn't being reciprocated. And that creates a quiet strength that doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand attention, but is felt deeply. This is not about winning her back. It's about restoring the balance where you are no longer shrinking to be chosen. When someone senses that you are okay without them, not pretending, not posturing, but genuinely grounded, they are forced to reassess the story they told themselves about you. And that reassessment is what opens the door for return. Not chasing, not pleading, not explaining, but restraint, self-respect, and emotional discipline after a loss. Most people don't actually miss the person. They miss the version of themselves that existed when they felt chosen, secure, and emotionally anchored. That's why the pain feels so disorienting. Your identity was quietly wrapped around the relationship, and when it ended, the structure collapsed. Rebuilding your identity is not about distraction or pretending you don't care. It's about separating who you are from who you were trying to be for someone else. When you react to loss, you stay stuck in the narrative of rejection. When you rebuild your identity, you step out of it entirely. Reaction is impulsive and emotional. It looks like checking her social media, analyzing every post, every song, every caption, trying to decode meaning where there may be none. It looks like replaying arguments, drafting messages you never send, imagining conversations that will never happen. This keeps your nervous system locked in fight or flight, constantly seeking relief through answers. But identity rebuilding is grounded. It is intentional. It asks a harder question. Who are you when no one is watching, choosing, or validating you? When you start rebuilding yourself, you stop organizing your day around the hope of her attention. Your routines no longer revolve around waiting for a message or interpreting silence. You begin investing in parts of yourself that were neglected while you were emotionally focused on her. Your health, your discipline, your ambitions, your social life, your sense of purpose. Not to prove anything, not to show her what she lost, but because you realize you abandoned parts of yourself in the process of trying to keep her. This shift is subtle but powerful. When your identity is rooted in your values rather than her perception, you become emotionally solid. You no longer need reassurance to feel stable. And emotional solidity is deeply attractive because it signals self-leadership. People are drawn to those who know where they're going, even if they don't fully understand how they'll get there. But you cannot fake this. If you're rebuilding only to get her back, the energy remains needy. The work only works when it's done for you. Rebuilding identity also means taking responsibility without self-blame. You reflect on where you compromised too much, where you tolerated less than you deserved, where you stayed silent to keep the peace, not to shame yourself, but to recalibrate your standards. When you raise your internal standards, your external boundaries follow naturally. You stop overgiving. You stop over-explaining. You stop negotiating your worth. And when you interact with her again, if you do, she feels that difference immediately. The most interesting part is this: when you stop reacting to loss, the loss loses its power over you. It no longer defines your mood or your self-image. You stop seeing yourself as someone who was left and start seeing yourself as someone who learned. That internal reframing changes how you speak, how you move, how you respond. There's less urgency in your voice, less tension in your presence. You're no longer trying to be understood at all costs. This is where attraction can resurface, but it's a side effect, not the goal. She doesn't return because you changed your profile picture or started posting motivational quotes. She returns because the person she once knew is no longer operating from emotional dependency. There is a quiet confidence in someone who has rebuilt themselves instead of chasing closure. It creates curiosity, respect, and sometimes regret. But even if she never comes back, the most important return has already happened. You've returned to yourself. Most people try to soften the consequences of their absence because they're afraid of being seen as replaceable. They remain friendly, available, emotionally open, hoping that kindness will keep the connection alive. But when someone chooses to walk away, the most respectful response is to let them experience what that choice actually means. Not through punishment, not through manipulation, but through consistency. Consequences are not revenge. They are reality uninterrupted. When you remove yourself fully, you stop acting as an emotional safety net. You're no longer there to regulate her emotions, to reassure her during moments of doubt, to provide comfort without commitment. This absence is not loud. It doesn't announce itself with anger or ultimatums. It simply exists. And that's what makes it powerful. When someone loses access to something they took for granted, the nervous system eventually registers the gap. People often confuse consequence with cruelty. But cruelty is acting with the intention to hurt. Consequence is allowing cause and effect to unfold naturally. If she chose distance, she chose life without your presence, your attention, your emotional labor. Protecting her from the discomfort of that choice only delays her awareness, and awareness is necessary for reflection. Without it, there is no reason to reconsider anything. Letting her feel the consequence also means you don't rush to provide closure. Closure is often just emotional reassurance disguised as maturity. You don't owe someone relief from the discomfort of uncertainty when they were comfortable creating uncertainty for you. Silence, when used with dignity, is not avoidance. It is a boundary, and boundaries teach others how to value you far more effectively than explanations ever will. When you disappear from the role she relied on, something shifts internally for her. She may initially feel relief, freedom, or even confidence in her decision. That's normal. But over time, the emotional residue surfaces. She notices the absence in moments she didn't expect. When something good happens and you're not the first person she tells. When something goes wrong and you're not there to steady her. When she realizes that the emotional support she assumed was permanent was actually a privilege she no longer has. This process cannot be rushed. The mind resists loss before it acknowledges it. That's why chasing backfires. Chasing keeps the door open without requiring her to knock. It removes the cost of leaving. But when the door stays closed calmly and firmly, the weight of that decision eventually becomes real. Not because you demanded accountability, but because you stopped diluting it. Letting her feel the consequence also requires you to regulate your own urge to rescue, the urge to check in to make sure she's okay, to ease her discomfort, often comes from your own unresolved attachment. But every time you rescue her from the outcome of her choice, you reinforce the dynamic where your needs come second. True self-respect is quiet. It doesn't justify itself. It simply stands. If she reaches out, you don't punish her. You also don't reward inconsistency with immediate emotional access. You remain grounded, polite, measured. Your response reflects the new standard you've set for yourself, and that standard communicates something words never could. That access to you requires intention. That connection requires effort. That leaving has weight. The paradox is that by allowing consequence, you also free yourself. You stop carrying the emotional burden of the relationship alone. You stop trying to manage someone else's feelings at the expense of your own. And in that space, you reclaim your center. Whether she returns or not becomes secondary, because the moment you stop protecting someone from the results of their decisions, you stop abandoning yourself. If she returns, it won't be because you chased, convinced, or proved anything. It will be because the dynamic changed when you changed. You stopped leaking energy. You stopped negotiating your worth. You stood still while the world adjusted around you. And if she doesn't return, you still win, because you no longer need someone to validate your value. The power was never in pursuit. It was in restraint. It was in self-respect. And it was in choosing yourself even when walking away felt like the hardest thing to do,